The morning sun was barely creeping over the horizon, spilling a golden glow across the rolling fields of my family's farm, a place that had stood for generations as a symbol of hard work and freedom. I had just finished feeding the horses, the smell of fresh hay mixing with the cool breeze, when I noticed the sound of a shrill voice drifting across the property line. There she was again, Karen, the self proclaimed queen of the HOA from the cookie cutter subdivision they had built next door. She stood at the fence in her designer tracksuit, phone pressed tight to her ear, pacing like a watchdog on caffeine. Her words carried clearly across the open field. Yes, officer, I'm at the subdivision boundary. There's a man trespassing with livestock and running some sort of illegal farm operation. You need to come immediately before it gets out of control. I almost dropped the feed bucket, not from shock, but from laughter. This land had been in my family for over a century, long before a single HOA meeting had been called, long before the first slab of concrete in her subdivision had been poured. Yet Karen had spent the last several months marching around like she had jurisdiction here, barking about violations, zoning complaints, and threats about how the HOA would deal with me if I didn't comply with their ridiculous rules. I'd brushed it off at first, thinking she was just another entitled busybody who'd eventually lose interest. But she hadn't. Instead, she had escalated, and now here she was calling 911 like I was some criminal invading her precious neighborhood. I leaned against the fence post, wiping my hands on my jeans, watching her flail her arms and shout into the phone. She made a show of it, pacing, pointing at my barn, and even gesturing toward my cattle like they were intruders she had caught red-handed. Duke, my old farm dog, barked once and sat by my side, his head tilted as if even he was confused by her antics. I could almost imagine what the dispatcher was hearing, her high-pitched voice dripping with authority she didn't actually have, describing me like some outlaw who had set up shop on HOA land. My jaw clenched, but I stayed calm. Let her dig her own hole, I thought. She had no idea who she was dealing with, no clue about the badge I carried in my pocket or the thick envelope of paperwork I'd brought with me today. Karen thought she was about to sick the police on me, but the truth was, I had been waiting for this moment. For weeks, I'd been working with county officials, gathering evidence, and securing the final piece of the puzzle. The warrant in my jacket pocket wasn't for me, it was for her. As she shouted into the phone, I just watched the horses grazing in the pasture, unfazed by the drama unfolding near the fence. My land was peaceful, steady, and honest, unlike the mess of power games and control Karen tried to drag into it. For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity. She truly believed she was the sheriff of this little world, handing down orders no one had asked for. But pity quickly gave way to resolve. Today was going to be the day the truth came crashing down on her, and she wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The more she talked, the more confident she became, raising her voice, turning her back to me, as if victory was already hers. I folded my arms and let the weight of the badge in my jacket remind me that this wasn't just another morning on the farm. This was the beginning of the end for Karen's reign of harassment. The flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows across the fields of my farm, illuminating every blade of grass, as if the land itself was caught in a silent trial. Karen, arms crossed tightly, stood at the edge of the gravel driveway with an expression that hovered between smug triumph and vindication, clearly believing she had finally cornered me. The officers approached with mechanical precision, hands hovering near their belts, their flashlights sweeping across my barn and fences as though searching for buried evidence of wrongdoing. "Sir, we received a call of suspicious activity," one of them said firmly, his tone carrying that standard authority used when dealing with a supposed trespasser. Karen jumped in before I could respond, her voice shrill and piercing. "That's him. He's been running illegal operations here. He doesn't even own this farm. I told you he's dangerous." She looked at them with wide eyes, feeding her fantasy as though she were the star witness in a trial. I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the humid evening air, studying the officers' faces as they measured me up. Their suspicion was obvious, their hands tense, their eyes sharp. I could almost hear Karen's triumphant thoughts. Finally, he's caught. Finally, he's gone. But then I reached into my back pocket slowly, deliberately, ensuring every movement was visible under the glare of the patrol car's headlights. The officers stiffened, hands brushing against their holsters, ready for confrontation, until I pulled out the small leather case that had been waiting for this moment. With one practice motion, I flipped it open, revealing the glinting gold shield and credentials inside. Federal agent. I said calmly, letting the words sink in. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The officers froze, their expressions twisting from authority into disbelief, their eyes darting from the badge to my face, then back again as if trying to reconcile the image of a quiet farmer with that of a federal agent. Karen's smirk faltered, her confidence cracking as the weight of the badge hit her like a blow. Wah, what is this? She stammered, her voice trembling now, the tone far removed from the shrill certainty of just seconds earlier. I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I turned to the lead officer and pulled out a sealed envelope from inside my jacket, its edges crisp under the night air. I handed it over without a word. He tore it open under the beam of his flashlight, scanning the paper quickly. His jaw tightened. Then his voice carried out across the driveway, sharp and deliberate. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Karen Whitfield on charges of fraud, harassment, and criminal mischief. Silence followed his words, broken only by the soft hum of the patrol car engine. Karen's face drained of color, her lips parting in disbelief. She shook her head violently, stumbling backward a step as though trying to escape the truth. No, no, this isn't real. This can't be happening, she wailed, pointing her finger at me with desperate fury. He's lying. He's lying. But the officers were already moving, their hands reaching for her arms as she tried to resist, kicking up gravel in a wild attempt to avoid the inevitable. You can't do this to me. I run this neighborhood, she shrieked, her voice breaking into a panicked cry. And as I stood there on my own land, watching justice close in on the woman who had tormented me for months, I realized the tables had turned completely. The hunter had become the hunted, and for the first time, Karen's reign of intimidation was truly over. The night air seemed heavier as the officers closed in on Karen, her panicked screams echoing across the farm like the cries of a predator finally caught in its own trap. She twisted and fought, her arms flailing wildly as the cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists with a sharp click that cut through the chaos. No, you don't understand. I own this neighborhood. You can't arrest me on his word. She shrieked, her face blotched red with rage and fear. But the officers weren't listening. They had the warrant, sealed and signed by a federal judge, and her desperate theatrics only sealed her downfall. The lead officer recited her rights in a steady voice, each word striking her like a hammer against a crumbling wall. I stood motionless, arms folded across my chest, watching her thrash against reality, as if sheer willpower could undo the truth written in ink and stamped with the weight of the law. This is a mistake, she screamed, locking her eyes on me, hatred burning deep. You set me up. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw not the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, but a desperate woman exposed, her lies unraveling in the floodlights. The neighbors had begun to gather at the edge of the property, drawn by the commotion, their whispers floating in the air as they watched the woman who had ruled them with fear and fines be dragged away like a criminal, which at last she truly was. Some gasped in disbelief, while others exchanged glances filled with grim satisfaction. They had been too afraid to speak up against her. But now they saw what justice looked like when it finally arrived. As Karen was shoved into the back of the squad car, her cries muffled by the closing door, a strange calm settled over the farm. The officers thanked me with nods of respect, no longer suspicious, but aware now of the truth I had carried in silence for months. We've been building this case for a long time, one of them admitted quietly. You just gave us the final push we needed. I nodded, saying little. The job wasn't about glory. It was about balance, about ensuring that people like Karen couldn't keep poisoning communities with power they never earned. As the patrol cars pulled away, their lights fading into the dark stretch of country road, I looked at my farmhouse, its porch glowing softly under the lantern light, and felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. The land was mine, my farm was safe, and the neighborhood would finally breathe free of Karen's stranglehold. The gathered neighbors, emboldened now that the tyrant was gone, stepped forward hesitantly, some offering thanks, others shaking their heads in disbelief at how blind they had been to her corruption. We never knew, one whispered. We thought she was protecting us. I gave them a measured look and replied simply, she was protecting herself. With that, I turned back to my fields where the night insects hummed and the earth smelled of rain and growth, a reminder that life continued regardless of human schemes. Karen's voice no longer echoed here, no longer threatened my family or my home. Justice had been served, not with vengeance, but with truth and law, and as I walked back toward the porch, the sound of my boots crunching against the gravel, I knew the farm had never felt more like home.